An envelope was opened on the America's Got Talent stage. And Simon Cowell had to stop the show because that letter was written before the boy ever stepped on stage. The lights were bright. The audience was buzzing with anticipation. Another Tuesday night taping of America's Got Talent. Another lineup of hopeful performers waiting backstage. Another few hours of dreams being made or broken on national television. Host Terry Crews stood center stage with his trademark energy. Ladies and gentlemen, our next act is 12 years old and he's here tonight with a very special performance. Please welcome Ethan Mitchell. The audience applauded as a small figure walked onto the massive AGT stage. A boy. 12 years old, maybe younger looking. Dark hair neatly combed. White dress shirt tucked into dark pants. Hands trembling visibly even from the judges' table. He walked to center stage and stopped. Didn't smile. Didn't wave. Just stood there, one hand in his pocket, the other gripping the microphone stand like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Simon Cowell sat at the judge's desk in his usual position, black shirt, arms crossed, that familiar expression of polite skepticism. He'd seen thousands of 12-year-olds walk onto this stage. Most were nervous. Most had stage parents waiting in the wings. Most would sing a pop song or do a magic trick and hope for the best. This felt different. Terry approached the boy with a warm smile. "Hey Ethan! How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Ethan said, his voice barely carrying through the microphone. "That's totally normal. So what are you going to do for us today?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a white envelope. Slightly worn at the edges. The kind that had been handled carefully, many times. "Before I perform," Ethan said, his voice cracking, "I need to open this." Terry glanced toward the judges, uncertain. This wasn't in the script. Acts didn't open envelopes before their auditions. Simon leaned forward slightly, his arms uncrossing. Something in the boy's voice, the weight of it, the grief barely held back, caught his attention. "What is that, Ethan?" Terry asked gently. "It's from my dad," Ethan said, staring at the envelope in his hands. "He left it for me. For tonight. He said I should open it right before I go on stage." The audience went quiet. That shift from excitement to something heavier, something more fragile. Howie Mandel leaned toward his microphone. "Is your dad here tonight, Ethan?" Ethan shook his head. Tears were already forming in his eyes. "No. He died. 6 months ago. Cancer." Simon stopped the show. No one knew what was happening. Simon's hand rose, not dramatically, not for effect, just a simple gesture toward the production booth. His voice cut through the theater, sharp and clear. "Stop. Everyone stop." The background music that had been playing softly cut out. The cameras kept rolling, but the usual energy of an AGT audition evaporated. Terry Crews stepped back, giving Ethan space. The other judges, Howie, Heidi, Sophia, all leaned forward, suddenly not judges but just people watching a child hold an envelope from his dead father. "Ethan," Simon said, his voice softer than anyone in the audience had ever heard it. "You don't have to open that on stage if you don't want to. That's private." "That's yours." Ethan looked at Simon with red-rimmed eyes. "He told me to open it here. He said it would help me be brave." Simon's jaw tightened. For a moment he said nothing. Then he nodded. "Okay. Then open it. We'll wait." To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 8 months earlier. Ethan Mitchell wasn't supposed to be on America's Got Talent. He was supposed to be starting 7th grade in Seattle. He was supposed to be playing video games with his friends and arguing with his younger sister, and complaining about homework. But 8 months ago, his father David Mitchell had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The kind of diagnosis that comes with timelines measured in months, not years. David was 42 years old. A high school music teacher. He played guitar and piano and had spent 20 years teaching teenagers to love music the way he did. He had a wife, 2 kids, a modest house in the suburbs, and dreams of watching his children grow up. The cancer moved fast. By the time they caught it, it had already spread. The doctors gave David 6 months. Maybe 8 if the treatment worked. David and his wife Sarah sat their children down, Ethan, 12, and his sister Lily, 9, and tried to explain what was happening in a way that wouldn't shatter them completely. "I'm sick," David had said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "And the doctors are going to try to help me. But I need you both to know that no matter what happens, I love you more than anything in the world." Ethan had cried. Lily had cried. Sarah had held them all together while trying not to fall apart herself. The next 6 months were a blur of hospital visits and chemotherapy, and David getting thinner and weaker while trying desperately to stay strong for his children. He kept teaching as long as he could. He kept playing guitar even when his fingers barely had strength to press the strings. He kept being dad even as the cancer ate away at his body. 3 months before he died, David made a decision. Ethan had always loved to sing. He had a good voice, nothing extraordinary, just a 12-year-old boy who could carry a tune and had his father's natural musicality. David had been teaching him guitar, showing him chords, encouraging him to write little songs. One evening, David sat in his hospital bed. He was staying overnight for observation after a particularly rough round of treatment, and called Ethan to come sit beside him. "I want you to do something for me," David said, his voice weak but determined. "Anything, Dad. I want you to audition for America's Got Talent." Ethan had stared at his father like he'd lost his mind. "What? Dad, I'm not good enough for that. Those people are professionals. You're good enough to try," David interrupted. "And I don't care if you win or even make it past the first round. I just need you to promise me you'll walk onto that stage and sing. Because singing is going to help you when I'm gone. Music is going to be what gets you through the hard days." "Don't talk like that," Ethan said, tears streaming down his face. "You're going to get better. You're going to." "Ethan." David reached out with a shaking hand and cupped his son's face. "I'm not getting better, buddy. We both know that. So I need you to promise me. Promise me you'll audition. Promise me you'll be brave." Ethan had promised. Because what else could he do? David died 2 weeks later. At home, surrounded by his family, slipping away peacefully in the early hours of a Tuesday morning. After the funeral, after the waves of grief that threatened to drown the whole family, Sarah found the envelope in David's nightstand. It was addressed to Ethan in David's increasingly shaky handwriting. A note attached said, "Give this to him right before he goes on stage." Sarah had held that envelope and sobbed, understanding immediately what her husband had done. He'd written something for Ethan to open in the moment of greatest fear and vulnerability. A final message. A final push. A final piece of Dad to carry onto that stage. 4 months after David's death, Ethan submitted his AGT audition tape. He sang one of the songs his father had taught him. His voice cracked. His hands shook. But he finished it. 2 weeks later, the producers called. They wanted him to audition live. Sarah had driven Ethan to Los Angeles, the envelope carefully packed in his suitcase. Neither of them had opened it. Ethan carried it everywhere, to the hotel, to rehearsals, backstage at the theater, waiting for the right moment. And now he stood on the AGT stage, holding it in trembling hands, 300 strangers and 4 judges watching him in complete silence. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this performance is still ahead. Ethan's fingers fumbled with the envelope. It took him 3 tries to get it open. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, lined notebook paper, the kind David used to write chord progressions for his students. David's handwriting covered one side. Ethan read it silently first. His face crumpled. Tears fell onto the paper. His shoulders shook with held-back sobs. Simon Cowell was standing now. He didn't remember standing up. He just found himself on his feet, staring at this 12-year-old boy reading his dead father's words and trying not to completely break down on stage. "Ethan," Simon said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You don't have to share that. That's between you and your dad." Ethan looked up, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "He said I should read it out loud. He said it would help other people too." "Are you sure?" Ethan nodded. Then he held up the letter with shaking hands and read, "Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you kept your promise. You're standing on that stage. You're being brave. I'm so proud of you I could burst. I know you're scared right now. I know your hands are shaking and your voice probably feels stuck in your throat. I know because I felt that way the first time I performed in front of people too. But here's the secret, buddy, bravery isn't not being scared. Bravery is being terrified and doing it anyway. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to win. You just have to sing. Let the music out. Let it help you breathe. And remember that even though I'm not standing in that audience, even though you can't see me, I'm with you. I'm always with you. Every note you sing, every breath you take, every moment you choose to be brave instead of giving up, I'm right there. So take a deep breath. Look at those judges. And show them what a Mitchell can do. I love you forever. Dad." The theater was silent. Then Simon Cowell did something he'd never done in 15 seasons of judging talent shows. He walked onto the stage. Backstage, producers were begging him to continue, but he didn't. The control room erupted in chaos. What is Simon doing? Is he stopping the audition? Do we go to commercial? But Simon wasn't listening to any of them. He walked across the stage floor, past the cameras, past Terry Crews who stepped aside with tears streaming down his face, until he stood directly in front of Ethan Mitchell. Simon looked down at the boy, this 12-year-old kid clutching a letter from his dead father, trying desperately to hold himself together long enough to perform. "May I see that?" Simon asked quietly, gesturing to the letter. Ethan handed it to him with trembling hands. Simon read it. All of it. The entire audience watched Simon Cowell, the harshest critic in television, the man who had crushed thousands of dreams with brutal honesty, read a dying father's letter to his son. His jaw clenched. His eyes reddened. When he finished, he carefully folded the letter and handed it back to Ethan. "Your father was right," Simon said, his voice rough with emotion. "You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to win. But Ethan, I need you to know something before you sing." "What?" "You're already brave. You walked onto this stage carrying that letter. You opened it in front of all these people. You read your father's words out loud. That took more courage than any performance I've ever seen. So whatever you sing now, however it sounds, you've already shown me everything I need to know about who you are." Ethan's face crumpled completely. Simon pulled the boy into an embrace. This legendary judge hugging a crying child on live television, while 300 people watched in reverent silence. When Simon finally stepped back, he looked at the other judges. "I don't know about you three, but I've already made my decision." Howie nodded, wiping his eyes. "Me too." Heidi was openly crying. "Absolutely." Sophia couldn't speak, just nodded emphatically. Simon turned back to Ethan. "Sing for us. Sing for your dad." Ethan nodded, clutching the letter to his chest. He walked to the microphone, took a shaky breath, and began. He sang the song his father had taught him. His voice cracked on the high notes. His hands trembled. But he didn't stop. Every word was for David. Every note carried grief and love and the kind of courage that only comes from losing everything and choosing to stand anyway. When the final note faded, Simon didn't wait for the other judges. He walked straight to the golden buzzer and slammed his hand down. Golden confetti exploded across the stage. The audience erupted, standing, screaming, sobbing. Ethan fell to his knees, the letter still pressed against his heart, crying so hard he couldn't breathe. Simon walked back onto the stage, knelt beside him, and said something the microphones didn't catch. But Ethan nodded, and Simon helped him stand. Share and subscribe, so this story will never be forgotten. After the show, Simon had the letter professionally preserved and framed. He sent it to Ethan with a note. "Keep this where you can see it. Your father's words will carry you farther than any golden buzzer ever could." Ethan went on to the live shows. He didn't win. But that didn't matter. He'd already won the moment he kept his promise to his dad.